Welcome to Connect the Plots with Cylia and Erik, a podcast about the stories that connect us.
3, 2, 1, and we're live. Hi everybody, I'm Eric Grove, and I'm a writer, and this is my friend Cylia, and she is a reader. And today we are joined by award-winning, best-selling author Fonda Lee. Fonda, thank you so much for joining us. Fonda is the author of the Green Bone Saga, of many more books, actually. In particular, The Last Contract of Isako, which she is just on the verge of going out on her book tour, which I wanted to ask you, you get to go and do book events in the UK, which I think, is this the first time you've done like a full UK tour appearance?
Yeah, excited for that.
Is there anything that you're looking forward to on that trip that's not book related? Like, are there sites or things?
So I do have one free day while I'm in London.
Awesome.
So hopefully I'll get a chance to just enjoy the city a little bit. I hear weather's actually pretty decent in London in June. So I'm hoping I'll just get to walk around and see some writer friends that are there. Go to Forbidden Planet, which is like a bookstore that has been on my hit list if I want to go check that out. So I'm doing an event there, which will be a lot of fun. And it's been many, many years since I've been to Scotland. I loved my trip to Scotland. I went there when I was in college with a good friend of mine, and I believe this will be my first time back. I'll be in Edinburgh and Glasgow, so that'll be great.
You get to hit both Edinburgh and Glasgow. Edinburgh is, I think, one of my favorite cities.
Yeah.
Because it's like you're in a medieval, like, it feels like a fantasy story.
Oh, I love how you'll just be driving along the road.
It's castle.
And it'll be like, castle.
When I went there, I stayed in a youth hostel. Like, this was many years ago. I stayed in a youth hostel that was directly across the street from the castle. So nice. Whenever you came and went from the youth hostel, just castle. You know, walking along, wherever you were at in the city, you were like, oh, we have to head back to the castle now.
Yep.
Fonda, we like to start our formal questions with the same one every time with our guests, and that is, what is in your book DNA? What are the stories that first created the structure of the person you became today? Yeah.
It is hard to really encapsulate them all because ever since I was a little kid, I have been a really voracious consumer of stories. So I was that nerdy bookworm kid with the Coke bottle glasses who sat in the library and read books until their mom picked them up when school closed. So I was always coming home with like stacks of books. And the ones that really made an impact on me from an early age were a combination of speculative fiction stories, so fantasy stories like the Prydain Chronicles and Narnia, and some maybe lesser known science fiction novels like the Tripod trilogy, or this Canadian author Monica Hughes who wrote Devil on My Back, which was this middle grade science fiction novel. So I loved speculative fiction from a young age. And I also loved animal stories, which felt kind of like fantasy, because they often were stories in which, the animals were protagonists. So, Black Stallion and Where the Red Fern Grows, and Incredible Journey. And so those were some of my favorite early childhood novels. And I think one in particular that made a huge impact on me was A Wrinkle in Time. And that was really beloved to me because it had this really smart girl going on a cool science fiction adventure. And that, I immediately, like, that just really was a touchstone, along with television shows, and in particular Star Trek. So I grew up on Star Trek: The Next Generation, and my dad was a huge Star Trek fan. He talks about how he would watch the original series reruns and hold me in his lap when I was an infant when he would watch Star Trek. So I guess I was like just osmosing Star Trek while I was barely out of the womb. And then when I was a little older, it was The Next Generation. And that...
Who's your captain of all of the different Star Trek?
It has to be Picard. I mean,
yes.
It has to be. I mean, I have a fondness in my heart for Janeway as well, but Picard is... He's my captain, you know? Like, so... And I think that Star Trek was really the franchise that made me see speculative fiction as a vehicle for grappling with big problems. And every episode of Star Trek The Next Generation really is it's an ethical question wrapped in a story. And the morality of Star Trek and its fundamentally inquisitive and optimistic nature, I think had just a really strong foundational impact on me as a storyteller.
Do you remember those posters? I think they were way more common a long time ago, that were like everything I needed to learn, I learned from, and it would be like Star Trek, and it would list all of the values from Star Trek. I remember seeing those in like, you know, like various middle school teachers' classrooms and being like, okay, now you're my favorite teacher now. You know, like all of the various like ethical or interpersonal lessons that you can pick up from Star Trek. I'm a Deep Space Nine person, so like I definitely watched The Next Generation as it was coming out, but I tuned in for the premiere of Deep Space Nine, and I watched every episode as it came out as appointment television, and I think that makes me maybe more jaded as a person. The Next Generation.
I know, so I need to do a deep rewatch of Deep Space Nine, because everyone that I know who knows me and knows Star Trek says you would love Deep Space Nine.
I am in the middle of it right now. Like I've been slowly savoring my rewatch of Deep Space Nine. I watched an episode this morning with my breakfast while I was kind of getting my head space ready. Like, I'm going to talk to some science fiction people later. I got to watch Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Yeah,
and I am aware that there is like a watch guide for Deep Space Nine that like condenses tells you like what are like the core episodes you need to watch in order to like get the full story of Deep Space Nine. So I am absolutely, once I get through this, you know, gauntlet of book tour and book launch activity, hopefully my reward can be like just sinking into a bunch of television shows and books that are on my list, and Deep Space Nine is on there. Unfortunately, Deep Space Nine just came out at like a super busy time of my life that included like college and moving and kids and stuff. So that was like the only reason that I can think of that I'm not like an insane Deep Space Nine fan, because it everything about it, especially the grayer, more like morally ambiguous political plots in Deep Space Nine are like 100% up my alley.
Yeah. I think you'll appreciate it with taking some time and being able to like look at it as like a whole and a more, because I think it does have a bigger story arc than Next Generation. That can conclude the part of our podcast where I talk excessively about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, though.
We could just become a Star Trek podcaster.
Just a fan cast for Star Trek.
Right.
We can do it. We have the technology. I wanted to circle back to A Wrinkle in Time, Fonda, because what strikes me, and it's one of my heart books, is Meg wasn't perfect. Like, she was a explicitly on the page imperfect girl, not just in her own estimate, but clearly in the way other characters work at her, and her family, and later on in the trilogy, other characters explicitly find her lovable, not in spite of, but because of those characteristics. Like, her superpower is her imperfections at the end of that book. Do you find that I'm of course thinking of your Green Bone Saga, when I'm like, those are some really imperfect characters that I still fell in love with, right? Not in spite of, but because of how complex they were. Do you find tell me more.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think what makes characters live is their humanity, their nuance. And I've rarely ever, I don't think I actually ever have written a book where, it's distinguishable. Hey, here are the heroes and here are the villains. And even books like Isako, which has some pretty kind of clear cut, like these are not some great people, or Green Bone Saga too. There's characters that are, clearly you might hate them. A lot of my readers hate Barrow. But even for characters that are like deeply unlikable on a number of levels, there's still, in my estimation, a duty that I owe to them to make them human, to make them like people, characters that you can like understand where they're coming from, even if you totally disagree with them. And I think that is especially important in our genre, in speculative fiction, because you're asking the reader to carry the load of believing in a lot of things that don't exist, whether that's magic, that's far future advanced technology, whatever it is. You are asking them to suspend disbelief about the physical world. And the way that I think that works, that eases that transition for them, is to make the human beings, the characters, recognizable and very real, because that's like the doorway, that you can put a recognizable human being in space or in a fantasy world or on another planet, and that's what makes that place real, is the human experience. So I see that like the character work as being essential.
Yeah, if the reader can't find a proxy so that they feel someone to put themselves in the shoes of, it's really difficult for them to resonate with the story. Mm-hmm. You mentioned your Star Trek watching dropping off as like life happened, like college and children and everything else. Did you find either the volume or the types of stories you were consuming drop off then as well? Or if not, how did you manage to sneak those in?
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely got harder to not just spend time consuming stories, but I was always writing for fun for myself. And the ability to do that became really challenging. And it's honestly kind of part of my writer origin story, that at some point I had, I'd gone through grad school, I'd like moved, I'd had kids, and I was working a full-time job, and I was, as a corporate strategist, that it was a lot of hours. And so I kind of just reached this point where it's like, gosh, I'm not getting to do what I enjoy the most, which is engage with stories as both like a consumer and as a creator. And that kind of led to a moment of epiphany where I had kind of an existential crisis and was like, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? And it ultimately led to me scaling back on my day job and taking my writing seriously and really like deciding this is what I want to do. So yeah, absolutely. I think that like also though, stories were something that I could always just take refuge in and enjoy. Like, when I was working and living in downtown Toronto, that I used that train ride to, read all the time. And I think that like a lot of, the being able to sneak stories into the like crevices of my life really came in handy when it became part of the ability to write, right? Like I remember having these like times where I'd be like, okay, I have like 35 minutes while my kids are in swim class. Like, what can I do with this time? And like, how can I like pump out a few words while I'm sitting in the car?
Do any stories you read on that train ride stand out to you now?
My gosh. I think I read Lord of the Rings like twice on the train.
Nice.
I was curious about that. Like if when you were squeezing in time for reading, it was going back to like old favorites, or if it was continuing to discover new books, or if it was a combination.
Yeah. I am more of a new book person. Some people reread their favorites over and over again. I have like maybe a few that I do read, but I generally try to focus on new books because there's just so many, and there's a massive TBR that I'll never get to if I live 1,000 lifetimes.
Yeah, my goal throughout this series is to increase Erik's TBR substantially.
Past humanly accessible level.
It's not hard. I'm not exactly like fighting back on this, but it does get a little bit intimidating because
it does.
For me, when I'm at like that decision point for like what's the book to read next? Mm-hmm. Do I read the newest book? Do I read an old book that I missed? Do I Do you have any strategies where you decide how to navigate when you're like picking, or do you just put things in an order and you're like not going to think about it? That's in order.
I have no strategy. And Erik, I have to issue a warning, to you as someone who is about to be a published author and really kick off his career. It only gets worse from here.
Oh yeah,
it's just
now we have the e-arcs that we can read. So like now we have the current books, the books that haven't even come out yet, and the
backlist, the e-arcs, and then there's the struggle between the books that you want to keep up with because they're part of your field, your genre, like. I should read, what's on the Nebula ballot this year versus here's here's like some manga that I've been meaning to read for like ages and like I'm not going to get to that. And then there's what feels like, even though it's like great to get arcs and be like somebody that people want to do advanced reads and send blurbs, it becomes also
homework.
It's like work. It becomes like homework. And I tend to get doorstopper fantasy novels sent to me because when you write a really large fantasy trilogy, it turns out that publishers start sending you that. And I'm like, I don't actually read a ton of like massive doorstopper fantasy books, and there's a limit to how many of those I can like add to my diet.
Well, and Green Bone Saga is a fantastic, long-ranging epic fantasy in my opinion, but you started with Zero Boxer and EXO, which are very science fiction-y. So was going from Zero Boxer and EXO and Crossfire into Jade City and Jade War and everything, like, was that because you wanted to touch the other side of it, or was it like, I need to, like, you're satiated a bit with science fiction and wanted to explore something else, or was it more natural than that?
It really felt pretty natural because honestly, Green Bone Saga just took so much longer to write and required a higher level of writing chops. So in terms of writing process, I was working on Green Bone Saga while also like writing EXO and Crossfire, and I came up with the idea for Green Bone Saga, even before Zero Boxer published. So it looks like from a external publishing standpoint that I did this and this and this, but really it was like they were, parallel pathed.
Yeah.
And I had, I knew from the beginning I wanted to write both young adult and adult fiction because I love, both sides of that divide. I knew I wanted to write science fiction and fantasy because, again, I love both. So it doesn't really feel like a jump or a transition for me when I do adult science fiction, adult fantasy, young adult science fiction, young adult fantasy. It all just feels like the same wheelhouse.
Where does the last contract of Isako land? Like, was this an idea that you've had for a long time and you were waiting for an opportunity to like give it some TLC, or was this a newer idea that developed more recently?
It was definitely had an idea for a long time and had to wait to write it. I actually had the idea while I was in the midst of writing Green Bone Saga, and it was like, okay, well, I'm not getting to this for a while because I have a honkin' big trilogy on my plate. And then I took even longer to write it than I thought I would, because shortly after the Green Bone Saga concluded, I was approached by Shannon Lee to collaborate on this young adult fantasy duology. And I couldn't say no to that because I was like, cool. And so the Last Contract of Isako ended up, like, I was working on that at the same time I was working on the young adult duology. So it's been a while for this particular project to go from inception to completion.
That sounds exciting, though, to be able to get it to that completion zone. And when you're at this point, as we're talking to you, you're like right on the edge of that release. And
yep.
So I'm sure, is this like a yay accomplishment endorphin rush, or is this a little bit like a exhaustion setting in the stage?
Last pace of the cross country.
Yeah, exactly. I think, I mean, both, right? The analogy that I would say is most apt is like the last week of pregnancy or something, where you're just like, okay, wow, this big thing is finally happening, but good Lord, also, can it be done? You know, like,
yeah.
So, yeah, that's
excitement and exhaustion all mixed up
yeah.
and intertwined.
Yes, absolutely. And also, I think the like slightly surreal experience that never changes with a book launch of people finally getting their hands on the book and reading it and reacting to something that like you've been living with alone for so long. And that's always very cool and scary, because you go through all these kind of emotional ups and downs with the work where you're like, I love it, I hate it, I'm such a good writer, I'm a hack. And like you kind of, you go through that like emotional roller coaster in a very solitary way. And to the point where like by the time the book comes out, you don't really know what to expect anymore. You're a little bit emotionally distanced from it. And it's like a whole another little like rush to say people actually like discovering it and liking it and that it's and yet at the same time also be like, wow, that I have to like now focus on the next thing. And it's always such a weird thing with our particular industry.
I do think that's something that sometimes readers don't fully appreciate, is that by the time the book comes out, you've been living with it for a number of years, maybe many years, depending upon how long the idea is gestated. And you have fit in other projects and other ideas as you've gone along. And you are probably, I'm guessing, knowing you, that you're probably actively working on future work in some capacity. Like you're not just able to be like, okay, this is it. This book is done. You do have another release coming up later this year. But like these books are done and that's it for me for a while. I don't have any, like, I'm guessing you're actively working on everything. So like being a writer means having like 4 or 5, sometimes 6 or 7 books happening simultaneously in your life, is something that I don't know how many people fully appreciate that aren't writers in a professional capacity.
Yeah, for sure.
This episode should be airing right after The Last Contract of Isako comes out. I'm going to take just a second to be a bit fanish because I'm super excited about it, because it intersects a couple different things that are interesting and important to me. So like my original major was Japanese. And so like the fact that Isako is the main character, there's clearly Ronin, and then the corporations, oligarchy in space, right? Like I work in a corporate setting, and then you get science fiction in it. It's like this trifecta of like, ooh, I'm attracted to this story. What can you tell us about what drew you to those two pretty hierarchical structures and putting them in space?
Yeah. So a lot of my work, if not all of my work, is just me taking things that interest me for various reasons and smashing them together. And the origin story of Isako is that I was at a convention, and in one of those room parties that you end up in late at night, and ended up talking about how like the best way to come up with ideas is just add like with magic or in space to anything, and then you immediately improve it, right? And so I remember saying something like pirates, but with magic, samurai, but in space. And then one of my friends was like, I would read a samurai in space book from you, Fonda. And I was like, I would write a samurai in space book. And that was it. And then that idea, kind of just didn't leave. This is the thing about writing, right? You come up with all sorts of ideas. A lot of them are trash and they disappear from your mind. And then some of them just kind of stick around until you're like, I guess I have to write it now. And the thing that stuck with me when it came to this idea of the last contract of Isako was a few things. First, I wanted to set a story in a setting that had kind of the bleak isolation of Dune, right? So Dune's one of my favorite science fiction stories. I loved how the environmental pressures of the desert landscape impacted everything around that culture, and was such an iconic setting. And I, not having any experience with the desert, but having grown up in Canada, it's like, what if I make this like desolate, bleak colony planet, but it's like frozen Arctic tundra instead of desert, right? So that was one element. The other was seeing connections in the DNA between two genres that I really enjoy, those being cyberpunk and the Chambara samurai flicks of like Akira Kurosawa and Masaki Kobayashi, and seeing this connective tissue. And the connective tissue comes from protagonists that are often outcast or in a really difficult kind of position because of this very rigid hierarchical society that they are in. So a lot of samurai fiction is about characters, often ronin, or characters who are fighting injustice in some way, but they're beholden to these expectations of service and duty, and the power of the Lord in their world is so absolute. And so when they go against the system, it invariably does not end well for them, but they do it anyways, right? So you think about like 47 Ronin, right? It's like, these guys are going to die, right? Like they go into the whole thing knowing that they're going to die. But they are righting what they see as a this grievous injustice. And they have to go up against, they're the Lord, the like absolute power in their world. Or 13 Assassins, which is this crazy film that is also, it's like there's this really horribly powerful, sadistic Lord who is abusing his people, and these samurai are recruited to try to assassinate him. And of course, assassinating a lord is not, something to be done lightly, and this is not going to end well. Or Seven Samurai. So again, there's all these tropes of this system being overwhelmingly powerful, and the like weight of duty and expectation, and people trying to go up against it despite the helplessness that they're kind of in.
Well, and that's so cyberpunk, right? Like
exactly.
the structures and the hierarchy, and like it's so punk because you are fighting against this against
the system, right?
Oh my gosh.
Cyberpunk has so many of these themes of like high tech, low life, right? Where the protagonists, there is like there's advanced technology, but there's also corruption and crime and darkness. And instead of the daimyo or the shogun, it's the mega corporation. And the protagonists are often the hackers, right? And like even the fact, for example, that like the term ronin in contemporary Japanese can be used to describe a like salaryman who is unemployed and looking for work, right? Like there's that like that connection, right, between like the dystopic power of the super corporation in cyberpunk and the feudalism of ancient Japan. And so I was just seeing these connective tissues and I was like, oh, like I want like cyberpunk and samurai, they go together. And like, what can I do with this? And then finally, the last element was wanting to have a main character who was a middle-aged woman, who was not, the sort of young, heroic fantasy sci-fi hero that we see in so many examples in our genre. I wanted to have, and truly this leaned into, again, this like the tone of both of these genres, which is often has this cynicism, right? This like both the willingness to fight for against injustice, but also this sense of like of jadedness, cynicism, of it's not swords and sorcery. It's not cozy fantasy. There's a tone there, and I wanted my main character to reflect that, but to also reflect like me in a sense, right? Like I'm not in my 20s anymore. I'm like almost Isako's age, and so I was absolutely kind of using her as a tool of personal therapy in a way to like kind of grapple with my own feelings about like not being able to kick as high or write as fast or wake up without something hurting. So all of those elements just kind of got stewed into a pot together, and that's how the story came about.
What are some of your favorite cyberpunk? Like if I'm trying to fill in the gaps in some of Erik's science fiction history, and so I'm actively soliciting like, hey, what are some things that came out in the 70s, 80s, and 90s that fit into that cyberpunk genre?
Yeah, so I mean, of course, there's Neuromancer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, absolute...
I have read Neuromancer.
Yeah. So Erik's already ahead on that one, but of course, like seminal work in and then Blade Runner or Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, again, or a foundational work. But I actually really and I have mixed feelings about this about this series because there's some things I like about it and some things I don't like less. But but Altered Carbon by Richard Morgan was another work that brought me back into cyberpunk, honestly, because I think cyberpunk, like other punk genres like biopunk or steampunk, tends to be a bit of a niche genre that is associated more with the aesthetic of the genre than the thematic content. Like oftentimes cyberpunk gets a bit reduced to like the Blade Runner setting, rain-drenched streets and neon lights and so on. So I kind of wanted to engage more with the themes of cyberpunk rather than the aesthetic of it. I'm like, okay, can I take these elements of cyberpunk and take them out of rain-drenched dystopic, a future Tokyo or whatever, and like put them in a more traditional science fiction space opera type setting, like a colony planet. That's it. Another, I will say, adding to Erik's to read list. And speaking of arcs, I have an arc of Scion by James Islington, which I've just started to read, and it is 100% like in the in the tried and true tradition of cyberpunk, including that like very like that like kind of snarky, pacey voice. And I think when does it come out? September 1st. So here's another TBR edition for cyberpunk readers.
My go-to is often Snow Crash.
Yes, Snow Crash. That's a great
because it's self-aware enough.
edition. Yes.
That I just. Sorry, Eric, you're saying something.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, my upcoming book is science fiction noir, which is sort of like a close cousin.
Yep. Yes.
Maybe even maybe
kissing
they
cousins.
Invite each other. Yeah,
Yes.
like they invite each other to the same parties as
Yes.
cyberpunk. And so I know that a lot of cyberpunk also inspired me. But to your point about the difference between cyberpunk themes and aesthetics, and just sort of, you can take cyberpunk and turn it into like a hot topic store, like literally just get the outfits. And that's maybe where I deviated, is I wanted to explore the themes of like noir differently. And it sounds like you're focusing on kind of more of a samurai story engine with cyberpunk components. Am I understanding that right? Or like you fused them together, but the thrust is closer in like story expectations and beats to maybe like a samurai story?
I would say that at its heart, this is more of a mystery.
Okay.
So going back to your point of sci-fi noir and cyberpunk being kissing cousins, there is a very strong element of that in this as well, because it essentially becomes a bit of a detective procedural, because Isako ends up trying to solve a mystery and getting dragged into all sorts of corporate espionage shenanigans. So there's also a little bit of I wanted a bit of like John Wick to bleed into this, because I love the like kind of assassin world building around John Wick, where it's like you just have John Wick. You made me believe in a luxury chain of assassin hotels, and like that's kind of and so like I wanted to build that kind of feel around the culture of, in my world, the contractors who are essentially the retainers, the hired guns, the samurai, to their corporate executive clients. And so there's like you said, there's a few different things that are kind of working in concert. And so it's kind of a mystery with a samurai character, working with the themes of cyberpunk.
That's really cool. Is this the first time you've gotten to really explore mystery as sort of like a story engine, or have you done that before?
This really is the first time, honestly.
And see, I find it like I loved it. I did kind of a similar journey with my project where I'm like, at its heart, it's a mystery, and I found, like going back to that challenge when you're going through your to be read pile. There's a part of me that's like, man, I kind of want to put the science fiction and fantasy aside sometimes and just grab like a really good mystery and put that in the middle, and figuring out how to bring those aspects that are not directly under the auspices of science fiction and fantasy into science fiction and fantasy, I think is something that I think is really exciting, and I think it's probably really exciting to readers because, it's something it's something innovative. It's something new. I mean, maybe that's part of what makes romantasy pop for some people, is that it's bringing in, aspects from outside of the fantasy genre into the fantasy milieu.
Right. Yeah. And I love that, our genre is such a big tent, at the end of the day, going back to the origin story for Isako, it's a little bit glib, but yeah, just add magic or space, right? Like add magic or put it in space. But really, truly, I think what I think is so cool about taking structural elements or or conventions from other genres and bringing them into speculative fiction is that you can both play with the kind of well-worn tropes of our genre in a different way, right? Whether that's like, Naomi Novik's like dragons. Oh, dragons have been around forever, but let's put them in like
the
Napoleonic era.
Yeah,
So you can do that, and also the reverse, right? You can take a genre that is so well beloved, like romance, and be like, but with dragons, with some speculative element that, like, ideally the speculative element adds like a completely different level and like is really integral to the story in a way that couldn't be done if it was just like a straight, exploration through some other, through the traditional path.
The part that's as a middle-aged woman as well, I'm really excited to read middle-aged women in space, to continue following that trope, because I so enjoyed like the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin, and T. Kingfisher often puts middle-aged women in her stories, and so I do love it in fantasy, and I feel like science fiction by its nature gets a little grittier, and I'm like, yes.
Yeah.
Is there any other either middle-aged women in speculative fiction or mystery novels that you feel like kind of crept its way into the Last Contract of Isako's DNA?
So when it comes to other middle-aged women in speculative fiction, I'll shout out 2 of them. One is Christian Avasarala. I can't pronounce her last name, from The Expanse.
Okay. Christian Avasarala.
Yes, thank you. Christian Avasarala from The Expanse. Fantastic character. Love her. And then Shannon Chakraborty, I'm doing a launch event with in Boston next week, has the adventures of Amina El-Sarafi, who is like a pirate mom. And, it's really hard to have work-life balance when you're a mom, and also, hunting treasures on the high seas. So I really like, both of those characters.
The best compliment my offspring ever gave me was saying that the fictional character I was most like was Christian Avasarala, which just
take that. Yeah.
I mean,
Christian
also,
is like,
she does goals. Brutal things, and they go, no, it's just very competent. I'm like, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Like, I, as a reader who is just like, who gravitates towards like competent characters and will absolutely indulge in like competence porn TV shows, I'm like, yes.
So obviously there is a pretty significant difference between writing a YA character that is sort of, the opposite of 100% competent, and like somebody who's learned that, and you have books coming out within 6 months of each other that are on either side of those. How do you make your brain do that, Fonda?
It was really. It was. That is a good question, and like you're absolutely right. I would swap between these 2 characters. What, like this very like competent but somewhat cynical like middle-aged woman, and then this just like hot-headed like 16-year-old kid who needs a lot of prefrontal cortex development. But I loved how differentiated those experiences were, because the stories just, they're so different. Like, I think it's harder when you're writing things that are similar, but when you're writing things that are so different, it's easier to like to separate them in your mind. It's more difficult to separate them in your physical schedule, because you have to be like, okay, how do I like make progress on this draft and then turn it in with still enough time to work on it. So, but in my mind, it was very easy to separate those projects, because the tone, the pacing, the point of view were so different. And one thing that I do, enjoy about young adult fiction is that like the characters are so self-absorbed. Like as like a parent of like two young adults. No, I know that like they're such like infant adults. You know, there's so many things that they don't know about the world yet that they maybe think they know.
We don't have to share this particular podcast with them. They don't need to hear that.
But it's that yearning towards independence, and I can
Absolutely.
do it myself. But then, but also, Mom, how do you do this?
Yes, exactly. And but also the like the inherent kind of energy, drive,
Optimism, hope.
Both like so. There's it makes it, I wouldn't say easy, but it constrains you as a writer in a way that can be really kind of fun, because you just have to kind of realize that like the story is driven by your protagonist always, right? Well, it's like my adult work it can be quite expansive and sprawling. I often have multiple point of view characters. There are a variety of ages. They're in all different places. They all have their own messy backstory. You know, it's like Green Bone Saga is, you know, the kind of, you know, pinnacle of that in my writing career. Big glossary of characters. And with writing young adult fiction, it's like, all right, what is this teenage boy up to like right now? You know, like the world is constrained by his experience. But like, yeah, it was nice to be able to move back and forth. It was logistically challenging, but
were you able to like say this is like a breath-marked duology day and this is like a last contract of Isako day, or were they like from 8 to 9 I'm working on this and then
oh no, I can't do that.
Like right at 9:05. Okay, I was because you know, like of all the superhuman feats that I know that you're capable of, I was wondering if that was another one I had to add to my list.
That you do not have to add that to the list. That I cannot do. It was definitely it was more like these 3 weeks I have to finish this draft, and then I'm gonna like, you know, be done with that, and then I can focus on this other manuscript for these weeks. But yeah.
From like a writing process question, did you have like cues? Was there like, I put on my, you know, my breath-marked duology hoodie and that's how I know I'm in that space? Or did you're just a professional and you're just like, that's what's on my calendar, that's what I have to do? Did you have like...
Sometimes, I mean, they were in different stages at different, like, so I'll have different rituals, I guess, or routines, depending on whether it's like a drafting, you know, day or a revision day, or, you know, so with drafting, which is for me the hardest part of the process. Like once I hit revision, I'm like, okay, I can revise, I can do this, but drafting is like just exercise in like in endurance for me, because like I just have to force myself to draft badly, knowing that it can be fixed later. And the further along I get in my career, the harder that is, because it's easier and easier to see how it's bad, right? Like there's a certain amount of naivety that comes early in your career where you're just like, I'm writing a book, and you're just, you know, pounding away. And then later on you start writing and you're like, oh, well, I'm going to have to fix this. Oh, well, this is already bad. Like, and so the drafting part is the hardest for me. So I have routines around like, you know, working on a device with no internet connectivity and taking the Alpha Smart Neo into like a coffee shop and the noise canceling headphones and all that. And so fortunately we're kind of in different stages. And also the process ended up just being completely different because the Breathmark duology was a collaboration. So there was a ton more upfront planning. I wanted to make sure the story was very buttoned up before the draft. So because there's just less with timeline and going back and forth between two people, there's not a ton of room for, you know, going in random detours off into the woods. So a lot of work went into like buttoning up the outline before writing happened. While as with Isako, it was like very much, it was more structurally challenging. It is a more structurally complicated book, as you'll find out. And so there was a lot more kind of like heavy lifting on the revision front with all the like pieces. And it actually didn't even start out as a standalone novel. I originally sold a duology. And then as I began writing it, I realized, no, it's a standalone novel. And that necessitated a bunch of
Isako
changes.
wants to be done.
Right, exactly.
Not the second to last and then the last
Exactly.
contract, just one.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, it literally says the last in the title. I gotta deliver on that. It can't be like the last part 2. Although, like, as writers, we are well acquainted with the manuscripts that are like final V3.
Yeah.
The last for realsies.
Our hard drives are littered with lies that we told ourselves about no, this one's done. I don't need to go back to it.
Yeah.
I'm going back to those. Oh no, go ahead, Erik.
No, I was just gonna jump in if you weren't ready, but it sounds like you're ready.
Well, what I'm wondering about is you mentioned some John Wick movies from a mystery perspective, but more like the assassin culture of it. Mystery-wise, mysteries in space, I guess. I'm thinking about like Station Eternity, but that's a relatively newish one. Do you have any other mystery in space that you would want to recommend people who would be interested in that, aside from Last Contract of Isako?
Mysteries in space. Mary Robinette Cole's The Spare Man comes to mind.
I really enjoyed that one.
Yeah.
That is a very Thin Man kind of
Yes,
Thin Man
exactly.
in space. I think
Right.
is exactly what she was. I mean,
Yes.
I don't know if she's. I think she said that pretty explicitly, but that's very much what's going on. Is it's Thin Man in space.
Yeah.
Nick and Nora in space. I saw Mary Robinette is one of your narrators for Isako.
Yes.
Is that correct? That's got to be fun.
It is super fun. And I love that like connection and the like keeping it in the science fiction family element. And I've been lucky to have some fantastic narrators narrate my books throughout my career. And so having Mary Robinette on board for this one is super fun.
Do you listen to your own audiobook like all the way through? Is that ever something that you have to do? I mean, maybe for like a quality check, but do you ever have to like listen to your own book and be like, okay, I'm gonna vet what happened in that chapter?
I don't have to because I get the finished copy once it's done, and there's people who kind of do the quality check along the way. But I always do listen to at least part of it because I like to hear the narrators do their thing. And like it's, as someone who consumes audiobooks and really relies on them to get reading done when reading time is scarce and I want to make the use out of like time in the car or time doing dishes. I just really love the fact that like audiobook narrators bring an additional element to the story, and their performance can like add a layer to the experience. So I always do listen at least to, if not the entire thing, at least part of it.
Speaking of how you fit in reading now, are there any books that you're reading now, aside from Scion, that you would recommend to Erik and I and the people listening to this episode?
I feel like I always have like 2 or 3 books that I'm like kind of trying to make my way through at the same time. So the one I just finished came about because I went on a bit of a horror kick. So horror is like a genre that I have that I've enjoyed, but have not really fully explored to the extent that I would like to. So I went on a bit of a let me pick up a bunch of horror novels, and the one that honestly has stuck with me that I enjoyed the most recently is a classic. It's Rosemary's Baby. by Ira Lewin. And it is, it's like an oldie but a goodie. And I haven't watched the movie, but I've heard that it's actually a very faithful adaptation.
It's a very good movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the book it's such a great execution of psychological horror. And horror is like, I mean, particular things in horror hit, you know, different people differently, right? Like it's often like, what is it that you find like especially scary that like connects with you? But I think that like Rosemary's Baby is such a great, like it's so effective because it like preys on this fear of like, you can't trust your neighbors. Like they may be nice to you, but what if they're actually horrible people? Or like, what if, you know, and like, can you trust the people that you think you know? And so it was really a quick read, but like one that really stuck with me and I enjoyed. The other one that I'm reading right now that I'm really quite enjoying is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. And I'm reading that one on audiobook, and I'm really enjoying the audiobook experience as well. A twisty sci-fi thriller.
Erik, do you want to tell Fonda your goals for this season for me?
So yeah, you unbeknownst to you, you stepped into my plot. So Cylia, like when we started this project, you know, obviously I copped up front to knowing that I have like a speculative fiction gap from the 80s and 90s. I just was not reading speculative fiction when I was that age, or that I haven't gone back. So she's helping me to kind of fill in that backlist. Mm-hmm. And for Cylia, she has like I'm going to call it a love-hate relationship or a hate-love relationship with horror.
Yeah.
Which is that she professes to hate horror, but then when you bring up very specific examples, she obviously she loves them. So part of this part of one of the things that we've done is we've had like a handful of like horror guests or horror adjacent guests on the pod.
Who have you had on?
So we've had Wendy Ann Wagner,
yeah,
and she will be the person that we've interviewed that will air before yours. And then we have one of my Viable Paradise classmates, Mary Berman, and I'm gonna just extra shout out Mary because the tagline that sold me on her book, which I guess she got from another author, but I'm still gonna give her credit for because it's such a cool like comp, is Rosemary's Baby meets Say Yes to the Dress. And it's a horror around the wedding industrial it's a wedding story horror novel, and it's her debut, and it's coming out in like 2 or 3 weeks. So we interviewed her as a debut author, and we talked about horror. So like, when we bring on,
she's comping Rosemary's Baby, and I just read Rosemary's Baby.
No, it was
that
perfect.
Is on my radar
perfect,
for sure
perfect
now.
segue. It's called Until Death.
Okay.
It's
okay.
Anyway, but we've had we've had people on, and we've been able to like ask them horror books that we can kind of I can assign to Cylia. And like, I don't want to assign Cylia anything that's going to make her hate horror.
Right.
I don't want to ask her to read anything that's going to be overwhelming. We just interviewed somebody, and we talked about, you know, like there's a whole big range between, you know, like T. Kingfisher and like Clive Barker. And I don't think I want to throw Clive Barker at Cylia, but I actually did say, hey, you need to read this book by Wendy. So Wendy and, you know, Wendy's newest book, I think I gave to Cylia to read. But yeah, it's kind of, you played right into the what is turned into like a season-long plot, and every episode we're going to end up with some.
I'm glad to be thematically congruent.
What
master plan?
I am curious if you said you've had like you haven't fully explored horror. Was it just not something that had been introduced to you, like a primary thing?
I mean, to be perfectly honest, when I was growing up, there was really only one horror writer I knew, which was Stephen King.
Sure.
And I read Stephen King, and like there are absolutely Stephen King books that I really enjoy. And like there's Stephen King movie adaptations that I love, like Shawshank Redemption, right? But after I read, I'd read some Stephen King, and I was like, cool, but like this is horror, and so I don't think I just like knew what the range of horror really was, because I'd kind of dipped my toe and read Stephen King and been like, okay, because he was such a overpowering force.
I mean,
in the genre.
So great for the horror genre, but also
sure.
maybe took a little bit of the oxygen out of the room.
Right.
Not intentionally, but
absolutely. And I think that like my re-engagement with horror has been about like finding authors that I'm like, oh, like, yeah, I really like what they're doing. Like, regardless of whether it's got the, like I don't think of it as like, oh, this has horror slapped on the spine. Like, I just think I really like this author. Like Paul Tremblay. I think the first book of his I read was A Head Full of Ghosts, which a mutual friend of ours, Luke Elliott, gave to me on my birthday. And I was like, I really like this. And like, so, and then I met Paul at like a convention. And so I got into his books, and then Stephen Graham Jones.
Yeah. I love
discovered him and was like, well, heck, like, I guess I'm a horror fan now, so like, that's kind of how that
so we just have to
has evolved.
We just have to find authors that Celia likes in that same way, and then kind of guide her that direction.
I mean, it really is like that. I think in for a lot of readers is like there needs to be a entry point that you find at the genre, and like the same thing with speculative fiction. Like, I think one of the things that always brings me a great deal of satisfaction is when readers say that, like, hey, like, my dad doesn't usually read fantasy, but I gave him your books because they're accessible to non-fantasy readers. And I like to think of myself as like a gateway drug, right? Like, I love that idea, is that like, because, there's readers who aren't going to immediately be into like, wizards or spellcasting or what have you. Hey, here's like a book that is fantasy, but is like very reality adjacent.
Well, and you've got, like you said at the beginning of our conversation, that human element that anchors you and brings you in. You're not writing necessarily about like alien minotaurs and elves and everything doing like you're writing about humans with human motivations and human problems that happen to be interacting with fantastical elements, which I think is a part of the genre that I think most of us enjoy.
Well, and I just keep tripping over the fact that things that I don't think of as horror that I love, Eric's like, Celia, that's horror.
Well, and it's sort
absolutely.
of like cyberpunk. It's like, is it just like it's an aesthetic sometimes? As much as it is like a plot. I mean, it can be different things, but
same. And like, I think that goes for speculative fiction as a whole, right? Like, there's people like, oh, I don't really read science fiction. Like, did you enjoy Jurassic Park? Science fiction,
Did you like Project Hail Mary?
Exactly. Yeah. Do you watch Have you engaged with any Marvel movie? Right? So I think there absolutely is that like the like, oh, people's perceptions of what a genre is versus like the reality of like what it can offer you.
Well, and some of that maybe is that you go into a bookstore and all you see in this horror section, and this is different now. It used to be much more dramatic. You go into a horror section and it's just the Stephen King shelves, and then you go into the fantasy section and you're like the J.K. Rowling and the Lord of the Rings shelves, And now we're seeing a lot more subgenre and diversity in authors, and we're seeing like different points of view, and we're seeing like genre mashups, and people are understanding that it's not a one size fits all thing. Like my association at one point with science fiction was Arthur C. Clarke,
right?
And I don't know that Arthur C. Clarke is the main person that everybody associates with science fiction now, or it may still be, but like, I don't know how much of Arthur C. Clarke is in The Last Contract of Isako, but it doesn't mean that The Last Contract of Isako isn't science fiction.
Exactly.
Right? Because it's a bigger tent with more aspects to it than just one or two pillar authors.
Right. Do you have any final recommendations of either books you've read, or like if you were going to recommend an entry point to your own fiction, what would you want people to try out if they think they don't like fantasy or science fiction?
I mean, the obvious one is Jade City, because it is, I think, the one that like gets handed to non-science fiction and fantasy readers the most, and hopefully draws them into the genre. And then as for like other stuff that I'm reading and enjoying, I just picked up a standalone manga called Goodbye Eerie. And I've just started it, but it's like one of those like rip your heart out type stories. It's going to be like, I know it's going to be emotionally devastating. But I haven't really found, I mean, I love anime and manga. I'm currently watching my way through Free Ren, which I'm really enjoying, and watching Demons of the Shadow Realm as it's released. So I haven't found a lot of like standalone manga, and like this is one that I'm reading. And I have some arcs on my TBR pile, including Scion, but I also have the Tapestry of Fate, which is the second book in Shannon Chakraborty's trilogy, and I have the debut novel by Ai Zhang, which I can't remember. I believe it comes out this fall, but it's called An Empire in the Clouds, and it is her debut novel, and I'm excited for her to release that.
Very cool. Fonda is your webpage is fondalee.com. Are there other places that you would point people to find out Fonda Lee related things in particular?
I am most reliably found on Instagram.
Okay.
Fonda.lee. Also, I encourage everyone to sign up for my newsletter, because that is how you will get the most comprehensive where I'm going to be and what I'm going to be doing. And I'm going to be in Meat Space a whole bunch over the next few months, on tour and at festivals and doing events. So please check out the events section of my website, and if you're in one of those cities, come out and say hi.
Very exciting. Any chance that you'll be lured over to the West Coast in the next 6 to 12 months?
Oh, definitely.
Okay,
yeah,
good.
no, for sure. I'll definitely be back. I mean, I'll be back in Portland over the summer for sure.
Nice. Okay.
And just hanging out a bit, and then right now I am planning to go to LA Worldcon.
Awesome. I think the pod is planning.
Awesome.
Both of us are planning to be there, so that will be excellent to catch up with you in, as you say, Meat Space. Any final notes that we should leave on, Cylia, Fonda?
I'm so grateful that you took the time to spend time with us today, knowing that in 2 days you're going on your blitz of travel. We wish you every luck and endurance in that endeavor, and that you come back in one piece on the other side. I'm so excited to read The Last Contract of Isako.
Thank
Absolutely.
you. Thanks, both of you, and good luck with the pod. It's been a journey for both of you, and getting it up off the ground and running, and you've had great guests on so far. So
I feel like we've got some momentum now.
Yeah.
So now we just have to, we're riding this thing down one way or the other.
Awesome.
Again, thank you so much, Fonda. Until next time, everybody, connect the plots. You've been listening to Connect the Plots with Cylia and Erik. Thanks. Please connect with us on social media. We're Connect the Plots Pod on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky. You can also support us and gain access to exclusive content on our Patreon. That's at patreon.com/connecttheplots pod, all spelled out. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.